Max, why don't we get things rolling?
Yes, thanks, Sam. Thanks for the introduction and housekeeping. All right, thanks everyone for joining. It's another wonderful Monday for some of the US colleagues, one day ahead of your public holiday. So I hope that you'll enjoy it. Thanks for joining, and the wonderful Trevor is with me as well. So we're going to talk about the multi-stakeholder experience within payroll. A very interesting and timely topic as we go through change and transformation within global payroll. And for those of you who follow me on LinkedIn, you've seen me use the phrase the aorta of data within global payroll. Well, I think that's very appropriate because global payroll is the aorta of data for our internal and our external stakeholders. Global payroll receives vast amounts of data, processes those, of course, flawlessly, and then sends them out to anyone else. That's a very simplistic view of payroll that I explained to my 3-year-old son, Bas. He then actually understands payroll. But what he then doesn't follow is that the biggest challenge is actually managing that data. And he starts learning counting from 1 to 30 now, but he hasn't reached the millions yet. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about payroll, Sam. If you can bring me to the next slide with that. Oh, thank you. So managing mountains of data. And why does it matter? Well, for us to truly be successful, either as Payzaar as a provider, or if there are providers on the call, for you as a provider, or for the global payroll /HR/ finance managers on the call, we need to understand that data. And we need other people to understand the vast amounts of data, or the mountains of data we actually use to build a business case, possibly for change. So if we would do this little exercise and we would take the number of countries, the employees that are spread across those countries, the pay elements, the filing elements, the pay slips, the payments, and what that then equates to. Well, we took an example of an organization that has a fairly multi-country scope, spread across 20 countries, and on average 1,000 employees per country. We would then say, well, in terms of pay elements that would be included in a gross to net report, we would see around 65 different pay elements if you would include those detailed elements within the actual local payroll engines, the counters, the accumulators, any static data that might go in, or the famous example of the Kirchensteuer in Germany, or whatever we would have in any local country. We would also have around 85 different filing elements per employee that are included in your payroll tax returns, or your online submissions, or as part of the Australia payroll, the STP processing. All of that for one employee for one pay cycle. And ideally, you would only issue one pay slip per employee per cycle. Let's not go down in the rabbit hole of retroactive changes that might span across over years, because you could then end up in multiple payslips per employee and one payment per employee. And if we would actually multiply that and have one cycle per month, you would already have more than 3 million unique data per cycle. Let's just reflect on it. 3 million unique data per cycle that originated somewhere from those stakeholders that you work with, and then have processed it with the stakeholders you work with, which could be your payroll partners, your software providers, or your external consultants that help you process your payroll, or as a provider for all your clients. Now, this is just one cycle and 1 month. But what if we would do the multiplier of 12? Thank you, Sam. We would have over 36 million of unique data elements. Now, if you would tell this story at a university, you could either attract talent, or you could fairly easily scare away talent. I think for most of us on the call, we would love to see this, and we work with this data. Now, if we go to the next one, Sam, you could think, okay, that's a nice mathematical exercise, but why does it really matter? And why do we really need to understand the data and therefore the desired stakeholder experience? Well, we had a chat earlier today with a global payroll manager around transformations and a case for change. And of course, we talked to a lot of clients and prospects about their transformation projects. And to be able to get a buy-in for those transformations and get business case buy-in, we would need a lot of different stakeholders to actually buy into us. And therefore you could ask a question to them to say, hey, how could we as a payroll team help you to be successful? Now that's turning it around. Instead of asking, for instance, HR for cleaner data, you could ask HR, what would you need from us to be successful? And maybe we could meet in the middle to achieve it. And also we're trying to gain that seat at the table within our organization, whether it's a virtual seat or our data sits at that table. That's something that we fed through our functional reports. We would have to build a payroll brand that people will understand from us and people will buy into. Now, those would be all kinds of different reasons why we would need to understand the stakeholder experience. And credits go to Sam for building this beautiful stakeholder map. Thank you, Sam. Because we put payroll in the middle, whether it would be your internal payroll team or payroll as a provider, we sit in the middle. Hence, we are the aorta of data and the aorta of the experiences. And if you would categorize the different groups of stakeholders, we would have those internal stakeholders, such as accounting, treasury, financial planning and analysis, HR ops systems, audits, HR advice, the business, of course, most importantly. Those would be your internal stakeholders. And we've kind of deliberately separated the workforce, i.e. the employees, from those internal stakeholders, because that's one of the most important stakeholders of us, which would be the workforce. We would then have those external stakeholders or providers, which could be the external audit that do come by every now and then closer to the financial year and ask a lot from the payroll teams. We would have those different social security agencies for those countries that don't have a combined tax authority or social security agency as of yet. We would have external providers and of course the tax authorities. Because if you look at it, and I did the math for most of the countries, we are roughly over 60% of revenues for the tax authorities. Therefore, we are the aorta of their money and they have a vested interest in us getting it right. Now, we've explained the data set, the different types of stakeholders and why it is important to understand what type of experience those stakeholders demand. Let's now maybe go into each of those different stakeholders. But before we do that, Trevor, do you want to share anything based on your experience and engagements with clients so far around the importance of understanding the stakeholders' experience for payroll success?
Yeah, so I think you're making some superb points there. I think that slide that you had open with people managing a mountain of data, a lot of the companies we work with, a lot of the people we're talking to, they are stuck in this absolute industry of spreadsheets, right? And we have data coming from a range of different data sources needing to be transformed internally, needing to be pushed towards different payroll providers, different internal and external stakeholders. And it's a real kind of, it's a tough task, because I keep talking about the benchmark being 100% right all of the time and on time for payroll. So there's little forgiveness in here. And I think sometimes that when we talk about change and we talk about the different stakeholders and we talk about support for change, part of the challenge is for the payroll community is to recognize themselves the labor that they're putting into being the custodians of this 100% right benchmark to make sure people are paid accurately, and to say, well, look, is there a better way of taking time? You know, is there a better way that we can save time as custodians of that KPI to start helping ourselves to ask questions around how do we support the business? And I think one of the key things as we go through this will be that the fact is the company is going to be unrelenting in terms of its demands to get people paid on time. The company is going to continue to be agile. It's going to expand. It's going to move from territory to territory. It's going to put new systems in to improve the employee experience, the employee value proposition. It's going to do acquisitions. That data environment just becomes increasingly complex. And, for the payroll team to generate influence, on one hand, that data, that volume of data, it creates an industry of labor, but it also creates, I think, a tremendous opportunity as well to be way more influential in the organization. And I think I'd encourage the payroll community to think about automation as a friend, connectivity as a friend, to say, well, look, what we need to do is we need to transform ourselves from being custodians and managers of accurate data in this process to say, how can we leverage that to help our internal and our external stakeholders to do their jobs better, and in that somehow find the room to improve how those operations are being conducted on a day-to-day basis within payroll teams all over the world. To shift focus maybe away from accuracy and just assume that, and hopefully let technology deliver improvements in that regard, to be able to be better business partners and to be more influential. So maybe we'll get into that a little bit as well, Max, as we run through the various stakeholder discussions and what they're looking for from the payroll team.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. I think that's brilliant. So would it be fair to say that you're promoting the payroll teams to utilize that data to go out to those different stakeholders to really understand what they would require from them? Is that kind of your call to action? Yeah,
I think there is that, but also improving. There's another aspect to this which I think is about the payroll team's experience as well. As we think about how, I think the folks at the Global Payroll Association did a really great job promoting payroll as a career. And how do we attract people into the profession? How do we keep them in the profession? How do we offer career progression around the organization? Because I think an awful lot of the skills that we think about, if we think generically around data management and analytical skills, there's an awful lot of that being done on a daily basis by the payroll team, right? A lot of data collection, transformation, understanding data sets. There's an awful lot of that. And on the other side, there's a massive amount of opportunities for people with data skills. It just seems to be, and that's just one example, it just seems to be that your payroll team are somewhat overlooked when it comes to those kind of wider opportunities to get into areas maybe like business intelligence and analytics within the business. But I think a lot of the core skills already exist in payroll, and that's just one area. So for me, I think there's definitely two things. Back to your question, it's how do we become more influential? How do we help our colleagues with the data we have? And then how do we improve our working lives for ourselves and our colleagues?
Perfect. Thanks, Trevor. I think let's use that as a guide as we go through the slides. Of course, mentioned already the most important stakeholder, the workforce. But to Trevor's point, we're included in that workforce because what you're saying, Trevor, is as well, attracting talent is not just for the business, but also for our own payroll teams. So how can we give a workforce experience within that payroll team? And if you look at the new workforce that's currently working, deliberately called workforce, because it's not just employees, right? We have a lot of contingent workers. We have people that are paid through PEOs or EORs, but the baseline remains the same: accurate, timely pay, right? That 100% KPI that works across the whole industry. But then also, I think there is a little bit of customization of the pay experience. We're used to being unique human beings and not a number. I still remember, Trevor, when I started my little payroll career in 2006, it was not uncommon for people to pick up the phone and call me a question and just state their employee number, because at the time they thought, okay, I need to identify myself with my number. But currently, you would not want to do that, because you actually expect through all the data and the connections for someone to reach out to you, that someone on the other end would then automatically know all about you, your past pay, utilizing the data. You might have questions that might be AI already generating a certain type of answer. And of course, access to data, documents anywhere. And if you would take that, Trevor, like what the workforce of the day and age of now does, how would you want to see the payroll teams reacting to that new demand of the workforce, thinking of data?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of things here, and I'm going to take a little sideways kind of track for a moment, Max. Over the last couple of years, I think inflation is something that has emerged as a real economic issue, and it's a real what is my spending power take home issue. And if we kind of connect the workforce back to the employee experience, if we connect the workforce back to employee engagement, one of the pay then has really risen up the top, to some of the top issues that the workforce are concerned about, because of course organizations are trying to do the best for their employees, but they also have to attend to other stakeholder demands like shareholders, etc. And at the same time, employees are being squeezed by an increased cost of living. So naturally, people, I think, are more concerned about how they're being paid. And I think if I think about the employee, there are certainly things about supporting them with the questions and queries. Of course, the HR team, I think, similarly are delivering, an improved employee value proposition. But all of that, I think, becomes a little unstuck if, the hygiene factors around, can I get access to my information easily? Can I have my queries answered easily? Do I have a supportive team? And basic stuff, is it accurate, right?
Yeah.
There's no more frustrating thing than from a data perspective if the employee on one hand is getting messages from the organization about all of the employee engagement activities that are underway, but at the same time when they check their pay slip, there's a problem. So for me, I think that comes back to the hygiene aspects of data. But then from kind of moving from there to say, well, look, if this is how we can compensate our employees, how can the payroll team offer solutions around that to say, well, look, if we allocate our budgets towards these elements or those elements, we find a more tax efficient way to reward employees, or there's a great uptake and a particular benefit in a particular region. Why don't we offer that someplace else and get great value for money for both the employer and the employee? So those kind of things from the data, I think, are potentially interesting.
Thanks, Trevor. I think that's really helpful. And the task again to the payroll teams to find the tools to be able to deliver on that promise. And Sam, if we move to the next stakeholder, I think we kind of made a group of stakeholders of HR, human resources, that we had an example of total rewards, ops and systems or advice with. But I suppose, Trevor, you speak to a lot of folks out there and about the HR experience. And what would you say would be the top challenges that payroll needs to solve with or on behalf of HR these days?
Well, my number one item is I think there's a cultural difference in terms of just planning, right? Payroll planning is a very much right to left plan. What's my payroll cutoff date? I'm planning everything back from that. HR planning is, if we want to introduce some change or if we want to introduce some new initiatives, tends to be more, what will it take to get that done? How can we do it correctly? How are we resourced for it? So, the culture there is very, from my perception, is very left to right plan. So we'll plan out the delivery of an initiative, and and that at a very basic level is operating to different kinds of delivery expectations, etc. So for me, there's a piece around payroll and HR getting to a common understanding of the tempos and rhythms of the various businesses and how they can help each other to be more successful. HR owns many of the systems that payroll need to access and utilize to consume data to pay people accurately on time. The HR team typically own the employee contract and the proposition and benefits that go into that. That often end up in payroll as part of the employee's overall compensation. And at the same time, HR is dependent on the payroll team to execute on the promise to the employee to make sure that they're paid right and on time. So I think there's a very strong interdependence there, but there's some very cultural differences. And I think often because of those cultural differences between how those teams tend to operate, sometimes things get missed because, and I will say that payroll professionals, typically because they carry so much weight on their shoulders to hit that cutoff to make sure people are paid on time, etc., because they're so deadline focused, everything becomes subordinate to that deadline. So somehow we need to bridge those, let's say, organizational culture gaps to be able to meet the demands of the ultimate stakeholder, which is the workforce, and collaborate together to get to good outcomes, while recognizing that some things do need to change on both sides to be able to improve the end result for the workforce, but at the same time, the working lives and the career prospects of people in the respective teams.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. I think that what you're saying is we started with the workforce / employee. So you would put the employee experience at the top and then work together with HR and payroll. So how can we deliver on that promise around that experience? And then we'll probably have some themes as we have here on the slide. What you hinted to is that that payroll calendar, right, with relaxed timelines, but we do need to pay on time, so you cannot always accommodate last minute changes. Automation, where you would ideally see at the front end, single entry, multiple usage. And I think you also in the context said, let's also focus a little bit on automation. And is that still a big topic in the interjection between HR and payroll these days? Is that data automation leading to those results within the calendar and the employee experience, Trevor?
Without a doubt, but we need automation with agility, right? Because I think the context behind all of this is that the organization now is moving at an increased pace, and it's only accelerating, right? And it'll continue to accelerate. And the expectation is to do more with the same or more with less, and to use technology as a way to achieve those goals. So, I'm a strong believer in automation, but you need to pick automation tools that are agile, so that, how many times have we heard of situations where an acquisition or disposal has been done and you have 90 days to get that new team on board and a new payroll sorted out for them, or a new entity.
90 days is even a relaxed timeline.
Right. Okay. Sometimes you don't hear about it till it's already it's already too late, right? But look, so for me, I don't believe in technology for technology's sake, and I think there's an awful lot. I've seen a number of different technology trends over the years that are being promoted heavily by the technologists, and I'm a technologist myself, right? What we need to do is we need to connect, like we're connecting the payroll experience back to the employee. We need to connect our decisions around how do we operate payroll, not how do we calculate it, but how do we operate payroll in the organization to be able to support the organization's goals. So how can we improve the the organization's ability to make the right decisions about where to locate, how to move faster, how to optimize payroll costs, how to support local business unit managers with the information that they need around cost. How do we support our regional and our corporate headquarters with what they need to enable decision making as well. But to have tools in place that support that, while at the same time create a good experience for those that are involved in the payroll process, and allow us to be nimble and to accommodate the next change that the organization is going to pull, that'll come down the line very, very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. I think we have the employee experience as part of HR, and I think, Sam, if you move to the finance piece, because I believe we have finance next, which are two of the most natural stakeholders, but do have different groups within them with different focus areas. But if you would typically report into HR, and I've reported into HR as well, the employee experience is typically at the heart of the payroll delivery model, whereas the shift, if you work to finance, is much more process efficiency, effectiveness, compliance, audit, and control. And what you hinted to as well, which I really like, Trevor, is being closer to the business. And if you would look at a group as finance, it would be very interesting to start a discussion with your finance groups, whether it's accounting, FP&A, or even treasury, to say, hey, how can we as payroll help you to be successful as a business partner? And Trevor, do you have any experience where payroll can really make a difference in terms of the experience that the finance teams are delivering to the business, and how payroll can enable them to deliver that experience?
So I think this is this is a really interesting area, right? So for me, I think if I think about going back maybe to some of the earlier slides about payroll, like ultimately to influence your stakeholders, you need to go out and you need to engage with the stakeholders, and you need to understand, what's driving them and how can you help them, right? Because in doing that, you'll start to create this balance of trade that, guess what, those folks will start to help you in return. If I think about this group here, the accounting team, right? 70% of a typical service business's costs are labor related. It's coming out of payroll. How can you make their month-end close more predictable, better? Can you give analysis to them in advance of receiving the queries from them about movements in that they'll spot in the general ledger journal entry? And often multinational businesses have month-end plus 2 or 3 working days to close the books, right? So they're under extreme pressure at the end of that period, right? So payroll teams own 70% of that problem, right? Can our payroll colleagues use that as a way to influence members of the finance team? Because guess what? Organizations typically divide into finance-led sales organizations or sales-led finance organizations. We are talking to the most powerful, one of the most powerful blocks in the business right here, and we're ideally positioned to help them. If I think about financial planning and analysis, that's all about, forecasting, budgeting, what's happened, where are we versus plan, where are we versus budget. How can, and back to 70% of our data about this is sitting in payroll. And then the things about planning into the future, things that tend not to, people know about, but they don't have the detail on to accurately do things like, if we wanted to hire 15 people in Spain, in France, in Singapore, we're thinking about putting a sales team in LATAM, where should we do that? But, helping the business with the costs that help to drive those models, not just the direct salary costs, but like a big component of the overall labor costs, of course, is Social Security and employer obligations, right? So again, we can be really helpful with the FP&A organization. And the other side of what they're doing is like, why are we off budget? Or now, if we think about the technology sector and the little bit of a shakeout we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, how can we help these folks to make the right decisions about costs if they need to go into periods of cost containment or control? Like, are we seeing movements in pay elements that potentially, running through payroll systems like expense claims or commissions or overtime, and are saying, look, we're in cost containment here. Why is there a big bonus payout flowing through the payroll organization in some country in region X, when we know that we're pressing pause on those kinds of activities? And the payroll team see that up front, way before the finance team see that information coming back. And of course, then you've Treasury in terms of how do we make their lives easier with different propositions that we can bring to the party to manage the execution of payments. So I don't want to drain this slide too much further, Max, but there's some ideas how we can really get close to and be business partners to one of the strongest organization units in the business.
I think that's very powerful, Trevor, because, as you mentioned, especially in the service organization, we're managing 70% of the total cost. And if we can enable the group that helps manage, forecast, plan that cost together with the business, we kind of also create our own stakeholder buy-in for a business case. Because if you would have the data points to show to this group what you're doing for them and what you could do for them, and you could basically make your business case, very interesting and appealing, because you would be able to show how it would help them to be closer to the business. So, as you mentioned, we don't want to dwell too much on the stakeholder, but thinking of it out loud. And if there's anyone on the call trying to drive a business case, get those data points out there, talk to your finance colleagues and make them see that if they will help you, you will help them.
Yeah, look, big time. And we all know that people will apply logic to a business case, and it will be objectively presented amongst maybe a portfolio of other change initiatives in the organization. And when that happens, and your business case is amongst those other business cases that the organization needs to choose between, right? It's nice to have some friends. It's nice to have some friends in in the finance team that are backing your business case. I always found it's no harm having some friends in finance.
Great. All right. Thanks, Trevor. All right, Sam, if you could move us to the next group of stakeholders, that would be great. Yeah. So I call them other functions, and I don't mean to downplay it, but I had no other general term for it, Trevor. But we're talking about audit, internal providers, and IT. I think I speak a little bit of experience where audit can also actually become your friend in terms of a business case and an experience. In a prior company, we were always also audited internally. And if you truly partner with audit and you would invest other stakeholders like HR or finance, they're always able to find something within your process that could be better. But you could also leverage audit to make a business case together with you. For instance, a business case that once together with audit through an internal audit made was the case for automation as we were expanding internationally very rapidly. This was the time to build out those automations, both for HR and payroll sake, and in the end also for finance to get those timely GL entries. So together with audit, you can actually make that experience. But then again, you also need to understand what the overall experience is that audit wants. And you being, of course, an IT guru, Trevor, can I ask you maybe to shed some light of what IT would expect from a payroll function in 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, so I think increasingly what we are seeing, and Payzaar is ISO 27001 certified. We're seeing companies being required to be ISO certified for things like insurance purposes, because having a standard like that in place helps to protect against, data breaches. And like, if we talk about data for a moment, I want to bring this back to that 36 million data items in a moment.
Yeah.
But if we talk about organizational risk, and if we talk about exposure, the IT team, which will potentially represent or closely partner with your data protection organization or your compliance function, which of course is connected with your various internal and external audits, there will be concerns about information security. And I know one business, like a traditional business, and they've undertaken this recently and successfully gained ISO certification because their insurers demanded it of them. And I think what that does then is, from an IT perspective, as part of a selection process, are you bringing credible partners to the table? If you are thinking about introducing some new providers to deliver your payroll, or some new vendors to help you with technology, I think just understanding how your IT team will work in that change process, because what we've seen from time to time is when we don't, when maybe the payroll teams don't necessarily engage in IT because they think this is going to affect IT because the solution they want is a cloud hosted solution, they maybe forget about the procurement due diligence around it. Now, I've introduced something, and I want to talk about risk for a moment, and I want to bring it back to those 36 million data items that business with 1,000 employees is shunting around a host of different systems within the organization, outside of the organization, and how can we bring risk to bear, similar audit risk to bear, to help us get our business case, right?
Exactly.
So you can actually quantify your controlled and uncontrolled data and do it in big numbers, like, hey, we have 36 million data items sitting in a range of different spreadsheets on different locations that we are now moving between ourselves and our third-party payroll providers. And guess what, folks? We want to tidy that up because we believe we've quantified the surface area of the problem, and you can use risk, because a lot of the stakeholders on this slide are risk related. You can help to quantify risk, and then while you're influencing the finance team by supporting their budgeting, finance planning and analysis, you're helping the HR team with maybe more flexible payroll cutoff dates because you're collaborating with them. Now you're harnessing the organization's desire to reduce risk in an area like information security and data protection. You've quantified it, and now you've taken it off your shoulders. You've put it onto the organization's risk register. And what do we want to do, folks? Do we want to invest to pay down some of this risk, or do we want to risk accept? And that's a very powerful driver to help that business case as well.
I think that's a great point, Trevor. What I take from that is like kind of storytelling through payroll data, and it's for the people on the line or watching it on demand, would always encourage you to at least create one slide or document of your own scope with those data points. And if you want to go and engage with these stakeholders that might not be as intimate to the payroll process as you might be yourself, to show them the vast amounts of data and how data travels through your systems, because that's something that will stick, that you can send over to them and help you do your business case. And if you would do that group from group, then you might say there is one transformation project, but it's one to many, because I will solve this issue, but all the stakeholders will benefit from it, and therefore you will get a collective buy-in. I think that's great, Trevor. So Sam, if we can move on to the next one, I think we're ready for the external stakeholders, and I don't want to spend an awful lot of time on this, Trevor, but you could call them a stakeholder or a very difficult group to manage, where constant change is imposed on the payroll teams. But external auditors, I would say on a catchphrase, they always come at the wrong moment, at the wrong time, requesting too much information. However, that's typically the case if you're not built to be audit ready, or don't have a tool in which you are indeed audit ready, where you have a central repository of your globalized controls. where you would have a tool with that ISO statement that you mentioned, Trevor, that now that I'm on the inside of Payzaar, see and fully respect the amount of work that goes into maintaining such a certification. It's not just a logo on a page. I truly respect you and the team, and actually all of us touching clients and prospects, maintaining that. So all kudos. And the tax authorities and the Social Security, as they are also investing within their IT structure, they request on-time data from us to basically run politics, right? We are also the aorta of data towards those tax authorities. And I sometimes laugh when people say we need a seat at the table. Excuse me, we're already having a seat at the table at the decision-making units in our countries, because payroll data is typically used when the annual budgets are being made. But that's just my 2 cents on the external stakeholders, Trevor. Is there anything else you would want to add to that?
I think that statement about being audit ready, audit fit is very important. And also then I think just in terms of the global mobility dimension to this, and back to being a more influential business partner, you know, I think don't overlook that this particular area is a very powerful lever that you can exercise, because you are likely to have a far broader perspective on the obligations in the company's theater of operations than most other people in the organization, and again this is back to risk management.
Great, yeah, thanks. Being audit ready, something that was always a mantra with my teams. Be ready for an auditor to come in at any time and any day, and you'll be ready. All right, thanks, Trevor. Sam, could you move us to the last, maybe most important stakeholder, which is the payroll teams themselves, whether you are a provider or doing it internally, because I think it is very difficult at the moment to attract, but also sometimes retain talent within the payroll teams. For those on the call, you are scarce and you're much needed in the space. So you would also want to be able to have a unique selling point when you go out to get new payroll talent in your team or to retain talent. It's similar to what you mentioned at the start of the webinar, Trevor, around attracting talent that wants to work with data and how you would want to position yourself in the market. Would you really need an HR or finance school person, or would you actually provide the data scientist with the tools and access to data that he or she has never dreamed of? Attracting talent is important. So therefore also think about that payroll experience of your colleague. Can they work from anywhere, anytime, with tools that are readily available for him or her to do the payroll process at a time that's convenient for them, that works within their work-of-life balance? Doing more with less. I think you touched on that before, Trevor. What if you would have time to review anomalies, but not find them while piecing together Microsoft Excel spreadsheets? What if you could tell your spouses or your family, hey, I actually have no peak moments anymore during payroll runs, where we used to, between cutoff and payment dates, work crazy hours to get payroll out to there. What if you could tell them, I now work for an employer that has a tool set and an experience that enables me to work Dolly Parton 9 to 5 and still deliver pay with 100% accuracy? But I don't know, your 2 cents on the topic, Trevor.
Yeah, look, I think part of this is being brave as well, right? Because if it's kind of hard in payroll, because it's so under the microscope. Small little, small issues turn very noisy in the organization. And I think if you're constantly operating in a very hyper focused or hyper critical kind of function, what you really need to do is you need to think about, how can we make this better for ourselves, right? How can we potentially use technology and tools to drive higher degrees of accuracy? And it's on both sides, right? We work with payroll providers who like our technology to help deliver their services to customers. We work with customers that want to join up the global payroll landscape, and we're all part of this. We're all part of this payroll community. I'm a vendor into it. selling to people that are selling services to customer organizations and the consumers of that. And we're all in this piece together. And I think poor processes and maybe poor technology implementations, they have a negative consequence for people working in payroll on both sides, on both the vendor side and on the customer side, because it injects tension and it injects temperature at the end of the payroll process if there's lots of issues and if there's lots of in a highly pressurized kind of time frame. And for me, I think an inordinate amount of time is spent checking, and maybe some people like the comfort blanket of checking everything and not just looking at anomalies as you mentioned, Max. But I think there's a good chunk of people out there that might want to say, well, look, I want to be that more influential business partner. I want to spend more time working with the data to see what value I can drive for the organization from that, and maybe less time, knifing and forking data together manually, checking data, my instructions back to my gross to net file manually, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of that work that could be reduced, and I think this is not a replace people with technology type play. It's saying, look, let's take advantage of technology to deploy our people to deliver better services into the organization to make everyone's lot better.
Exactly. Well, thanks for that, Trevor. Okay, all right, Sam, I think I'll wrap this part up through the next kind of summary, where payroll has a tough act to balance with all the 36 million unique data points and with all kinds of different stakeholder expectations that we just went through, from the workforce to HR to finance to external stakeholders to the payroll teams themselves that every day want to wake up and say, I have the tools to do my job. I am able to be a business partner. I'm able to make a difference in employees' lives, in stakeholders' lives, and I don't need to scramble for data. I think it's great to have you, Trevor, with your experience. If we now move on to the next part of it, to really get global payroll in that 21st century, or possibly even in the 22nd century. I think, Trevor, we have a few slides on the Payzaar platform as well, starting with the modules. Would you want to touch on those for the audience, please? How we help payroll? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we'll spend just a couple of moments on this. What we do, we're kind of the glue bringing the various actors together in the payroll environment through our operation control platform. It brings providers, payroll professionals, and people in regional hubs, shared service centers, local teams, in-house payroll, outsourced payroll. Bring it together so you can see what's going on, right? It gives you that visibility, an opportunity to standardize and to control what's happening. And part of that then is out of that we have to generate a lot of insight and information together from all over the world. We do it seamlessly, and it's of huge benefit. And then we have a connectivity layer where we have that payroll data in, and now we're able to transform that to push to your finance team in the formats that they need, and hopefully speed up that month-end close and smarten up the whole payroll accounting aspect of things. Of course, back to the aorta analogy, being right at the center of the organization's data flows, HR Connect helps you to pull, manage, and transform your payroll inputs, to gather them together and then transform them into the shape that your local provider needs, right? Because you got to think about your local provider or your third-party payroll provider in this process, because the folks working in their organizations have a similar challenge trying to knife and fork your data into their systems. If that breaks down, there's too much manual intervention, well, guess what? Your payroll is going to be wrong, right? So for us, it's about managing the payroll data lifecycle from some of those source systems to give you validation, error detection, transformation tools that's done automatically to get it to where it needs to go to accurately and reduce error all around. You benefit as a consumer of these of these systems, the third-party payroll provider benefits are getting data in a better shape. Ultimately, the employee benefits as well, because you have a more accurate payroll. And our employee portal allows employees to access their employment documents, pay slips, year-end tax certificates, etc., on whatever device they want, where they want. So and the nice thing is you can start small with this, plug it together based on the particular pain point you're trying to solve today. Maybe you want to solve everything, but maybe you want to digest this in chunks as well.
Exactly, perfect. Thank you, Trevor. I know this is a quick run through, but if there's anyone on the call, of course, wanted to dive deeper, we can always schedule something separately. I think we have another one, Sam, just before we get to the use cases. I'll speak to this a little bit, Trevor. If you look at the typical results within payroll, if you would deploy a modular approach like Payzaar, would be that operational efficiency and flexibility, which has tangible results with a shorter payroll calendar, which will benefit that huge stakeholder that's driving the business called finance, because they will be able to close earlier, and helps HR deliver on the promise because they will have a more relaxed timeline. Just some examples, but also your payroll teams or your teams within the providers to do more with less. You would check everything within a matter of 30 minutes because it's presented to you in a way that you can automatically validate. There's much more attractive economies of scale, because Trevor, I believe you've done implementations in a matter of weeks instead of a matter of months, have you?
Yeah, so look, our application is designed to rapid implementation. We train the end users of the solution how to implement it, and the tools are self-serviceable. Back to the agile point I made earlier around, they're meant to be rapidly deployed, easily configured, and to be able to put their arms around changes in the organization very quickly. So, we have one customer. Now they're a payroll provider, but they get payrolls up and running for their customers in our solution in under 15 minutes. So, so there's some phenomenal proof points around how quick and easy it is to deploy.
Wonderful, thanks, Trevor. I think Sam, Trevor and I are handing over to you to just briefly walk us through some of those business cases. And then I see we do have a question in the chat that we can try to address that at the end as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we are coming up on time here, so I want to try to get through this really quickly because I do want to have some time to take questions from people. Just to wrap things up, I wanted to give you a couple examples of what this looks like in practice if we're talking about technology and implementation and using kind of a technology-driven modular solution like ours. So this is Blueprism. Blueprism has been a customer of ours since, I believe, 2019. They are a robotic process automation company. They're based in the UK. So they actually dabble in a lot of kind of automation, process automation, machine learning, and stuff like that. What they needed is a solution to be able to consolidate payroll management and payroll operations, because everything was kind of very disjointed in their case. So they were doing everything essentially by hand. They didn't have technology to mediate their processes. So everything was spreadsheets and email, and working with different ICPs in different countries. And then they had some of their payrolls they were doing in-house. And the issue they had is they were looking for a provider. They went out into the market. They spoke to a bunch of different aggregators. And one of the requirements they had was, can we keep processing our payrolls, these payrolls in-house, like our largest countries, while using your service for everything else, and, for example, benefiting from your reporting and stuff like that. And these aggregators would say, no, you can't do that. Unless we do the processing for you, you can't use the rest of our suite of solutions, basically. So we ended up meeting with them. We ended up meeting Stuart, who was their global payroll manager at the time. He's since moved on to a different role. And what we found is that what they needed was not someone to handle processing from them, because they already had all that taken care of with their current vendors. What they needed was just a technology layer, a technology solution that could intermediate all the different payroll processes that they had, and pick up and parse that data, consume their data, standardize their processes, give them reporting, give them better auditability, et cetera, et cetera. and without having to go through kind of a very big dramatic payroll transformation process. So the highlight of this is that they were able to deploy the entire thing in 3 or 4 weeks, basically, from start to finish. We rolled out the first few countries for them. We showed their team how to do it. And then once their team learned how to do it, it became entirely self-serviceable. So they were able to set up the rest of their countries on their own with minimal support from us. And that extended to, beyond the rollout process, that extends to today, where they can manage everything in-house. Everything is no code, everything is point and click, basically. So whenever they have to set up a new country, a new pay group, map their data differently or something like that, they just do it themselves. And the other example I wanted to go through was this one, and you'll see it says pharma multinational. The reason it says it is because they don't want us to disclose who they are. What I can tell you is that they're very large. They have between 20 and 25,000 employees, and they're present in about 60 countries. So they're really, really large company. And they're an interesting case because they did not need processing at all. They had a very mature payroll environment already with their own providers. They had everything regionalized. So they were working with different aggregators, and they had an aggregator for Europe. They had an aggregator for North America. They had an aggregator for LATAM. They had one for APAC. So they had these kind of big regional providers that were handling processing for them. And the issue that they had was reporting and integration with finance, specifically generating general ledgers to do their month-end close. So they're a company that really uses payroll data. They have a lot of, very strict, very high-level reporting requirements. And what would happen to them is that the chief accounting officer, for example, would come to the payroll team and say, hey, I need you to build me this report that covers all these different elements from our entire, from all over the world, basically. And they would say, I'm really sorry, but I can't do that for you, because I have to pull data from 4 or 5 different aggregators that are in 4 or 5 different formats representing, 40 different countries. And then I have to transform that data and combine it and put it together in a way that's going to be intelligible to you. And it's going to take me a week to do that. And I can't spend a week doing this because I actually have to make sure that people are getting paid. So this was a situation that they were in. So what they needed only was a solution that could only solve the reporting thing and the reporting problem. And the solution to that was having a way to consume all the data from all their different providers, homogenize that data, standardize that data so it all lives in one format, which means that they could actually query it in real time from the cloud. So instead of having to build all these reports by hand and say, I have to contact my regional payroll team in this country, I contact my payroll team in another country, and they have to supply this and I have to put it together and blah, blah, blah. I can go into the system and I can just put in the parameters and the data I get the data back instantaneously, basically. The other thing that they solved with this was generating their general ledgers. So instead of having to, again, put those together by hand or having to homogenize those because they came from different providers and from different countries by hand, what the system does is it takes the data that comes from their gross to net, from their reporting, and it automatically transforms that into a file that is interpretable, that can be used by their corporate finance tool. So it automates that process for them. And just these 2 things have an impact of hundreds of hours a year of work for them that they don't have to do.
I think it's a great use case to close off the session, Sam. Thank you. I think you might do the official close, but I want to thank Trevor also for joining. Thank you, Trevor, for sharing your experience. And if I would list the key takeaways from all of this is start with payroll at a glance, create that data point for you to go out to the stakeholders. Then the second point is actually identify all of those stakeholders and then understand their needs. I once had a very smart guy telling me do an important thing for an important person. So if you start understanding those stakeholders and you start knowing what's important for them, do that important thing for them, because it will help you get your buy-in ultimately within your business case and payroll to be successful. But over to you, Sam, for the general closing.
Yeah, before we wrap up, I know that we're a little bit over time, but we do have a question here that I would like to answer. And Trevor, maybe you can take this one. We have a question in the chat from Antonio, and Antonio says, I would like to know the flexibility in the integration with payroll systems, especially in Angola, since it's a Portuguese country. What does Social Security, labor, income tax, et cetera, et cetera? I think generally the question is it possible to integrate directly with the portal and the systems or systems that are processing taxes, Social Security contributions, et cetera? Or should we simply export and import the information via interface, using a spreadsheet, XLS or something like that? So I think it's a question of compatibility with a regional payroll that has very, very specific requirements. I think that's the question.
Right. Okay. So what we do in the application is we will percolate up what your compliance obligations are. However, we believe that the local requirements of filing with the local authorities are best done by a local service. So today, we're able to show you where you are in terms of what you need to file when and where. The actual filing itself is performed locally by those local systems.
Okay. I think if that answers, Antonio, if that answers your question, good, I hope. If you have any further questions or you'd like us to elaborate any further on that, you can find our contact information in any of the emails and on social media. I will be sharing the video of the session and the presentation of the session with all of you, so you have an asset that you can take back into your own organizations if there's something that you want to build on, of course. And like I said, if you have further questions, you can find us on social media. You can find us via email. You can also find us on our website. Send us a message. We'd love to talk further, expand on this or any other global payroll related topic that you may be interested in. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to see you at one of our future webinars. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.